In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. We join you after the first three games of the Grizzlies Thunder series. Not a very fun one for Memphis so far. And right on the heels of what amounted to be a pretty miserable loss in Game 3 to the Thunder. It feels like they've sort of been inventing new ways to break the hearts of Grizzlies fans so far in this series, doesn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, Game 3, the way Game 3 came apart, I mean, feels sort of, ruefully appropriate to the season in some ways. I mean, one of the stories of the season has been Ja Morant getting injured in play. That was the fourth time this season that there's been some kind of contact or some injury that's related to an on-court incident. Obviously, you had him falling on his hip, getting undercut by Christian Koloko against the Lakers, which was a pretty bad injury. He missed time. Early in the season, you had him taking the screen from Daniel Tice on his surgically repaired shoulder, and he missed time. And you had him coming down and twisting his ankle against Golden State, where he did not miss much time, didn't miss any games, but impacted his play. And then you had that one, and it feels like this has been a season of sort of holding your breath when Ja Morant leaves his feet. And to me, what happened last night was somewhat similar to what had happened in the play-in game against Golden State, in that the injury happened at the precise moment that the Grizzlies team performance was peaking. The Grizzlies had gotten down big against Golden State, and they were coming all the way back, and Morant hits this shot to bring them within one, and they have the momentum. And the second you start to hit that peak, he hits the floor, he gets injured. And then last night, it really felt like the moment when that happened, the second before that was the precise peak of the game. They're up 27. Pippen gets the steal. It's a 2-on-1. They're coming the other way. The crowd's fired up. They're about to go up, 29 if Morant makes a shot, and they're going to end this game in the first half, maybe. And that precise moment where you feel like you got it is the moment where the whole building gets deflated.
We have all three games to get into here.
Yeah.
And we should talk about all of them and what they mean for the big picture. But it just feels like we have to start with the one you're discussing and the jaw injury, because that feels like, as Pete says, the hammer nail coffin. That's the nail right there. The way that they lost that game, and I think you're right. I think that the timing of it was certainly bad because it allowed enough time for OKC to inject just enough doubt in that Grizzlies team in the second half, to where you could just slowly feel the game slipping away. But
And honestly, I think you could feel it even in the first half, because I think the Grizzlies were playing with just great pace. I described it at the time as they were playing fast but not hurried. They were just playing with great pace and great pop in that game. And they were playing that way even when Morant went to the bench in the first half. And it felt like that injury sucked the whole air out of the building and out of the Grizzlies, and they bogged down immediately. It didn't take them the second half. They bogged down immediately, and they had a great play at the end of the first half when Vince Williams magically reappears off the bench and blocks a shot, and Luke Kennard hits a three, which has been a rare sight, and that was a nice little punctuation. But I felt like the Grizzlies got bogged down pretty much immediately when that injury happened in terms of their own pace and their own play.
Yeah, I mean, but I agree, but also the turnovers didn't really start to be extremely costly until that second half. And
Right.
honestly, in the end, we could talk about all these games. We could talk about where it's gone wrong, and frankly, what the Thunder do right. But in the end, that's been the absolute killer for this team. is the fact that they can't stop Oklahoma City from just taking the ball away and using live ball turnovers to go score points. And
Here's the thing, though. I mean, I think you're right that that's the key to the series. The thing that to me is sort of interesting and most regrettable about that injury happening is that the Grizzlies sort of did figure that out. They figured that out in the second half of game 2 and in the first half of game 3. I think they made the right adjustment, and that adjustment was to take the first good shot you find. I think they realized that the more you pass and the more you dribble, the more opportunity Oklahoma City has to just take the ball away from you. And so I actually think the Grizzlies kind of they lessened their turnovers in through 48 minutes of basketball across 2 games. But once
they didn't
Morant
in
got
the third.
well, that's good because once Morant got hurt, to me it was like a 3-pronged thing. One, you lost your best ball handler, and it exposed the lack of ball handling depth and talent on the team beyond Ja Morant. 2, I think the spirit of the team just got sapped by having that injury happen. So I think they were a lesser version of themselves, even in terms of the talent on the floor. And then I think OKC smelled blood in the water, and then you couldn't maintain it. But I think they had figured out the right way to play to give themselves a chance against that team, and that way to play was geared towards trying to minimize the turnovers. So I think the Grizzlies had made a good strategic adjustment, but they just couldn't do it anymore once they lost Ja in that game.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said. And that honestly, that was the part that was so deflating. It wasn't like, oh wait, the Thunder are just hitting a lot of shots now. Like, maybe they'll be the ones to cool off in the fourth quarter because the Grizzlies came out. They made so many threes. It was not sustainable what they were doing. Scottie Pippen Jr. makes all these threes. Um,
Yeah,
Santi's making threes, whatever. The defense was not good. Like early in the game, I think OKC at one point was like 9 for 9 or 10 for 10 from two. Like it was
right.
just like that they were right there stalking, and it felt like okay, well the Grizzlies are going to cool off at some point, and then OKC is going to take this game back over, and that just didn't happen. Then the Grizzlies started to find sustainable offensive success in the second quarter,
Right.
all the way up until the Ja injury. Ja injury happens, and we get to the turnovers in the third. And, after having what, one turnover or maybe two turnovers with 2 points off of turnovers up until that point, it just becomes the Thunder avalanche that we talk about. That's happened in every single game, and it was 15 points off of turnovers. I forget how many turnovers it was. I think it was like 7 or something in the third quarter, and that cut the lead in half. Went from what 26 to 13, and at that point, like it felt like the writing was on the wall. Like I just out of curiosity, tweeted Grizzlies fans, "How are you feeling?" And like everybody was saying, like we've seen this story before. Like we know what's coming. Like I'm gonna throw up, like,
Right.
and I think at that point you knew that this was just not going to end well for the Grizzlies in this game. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened in the fourth quarter. And there's just no way you're feeling the same way if Ja's on the court. You're just way more confident because you're going to get some buckets. You're going to have a steady hand on the ball, and the minute that happened, like Scottie Pippen Jr. was great in that game, but he's not nearly the ball handler that Ja is. And Desmond Bain the same thing. So
I mean, I think one of the subplots to the season has been Desmond Bain has been overtaxed as a ball handler and playmaker. I think you've seen that with his career high turnover rates really since the beginning of the season. And I think the Grizz, from a roster construction standpoint, this series and that second half without Morant sort of exposed, the Grizzlies' decision not to put a lot of emphasis on backup point guard play sort of came back to haunt them because they don't even carry a third point guard on the roster. And Pippen is more of a 3-and-D combo guard than a true point guard anyway. And the Grizzlies had sort of decided that, we like the look of these bigger backcourts, dual combo guard. We can play Bain and Kennard. For a lot of the middle of the season, like Pippen was sort of falling out of the rotation, even with Ja missing games, and they were playing Bain and Kennard, right? They were doing that. Taylor Jenkins was doing that. And that some of that stuff looked pretty good in the regular season, but in a playoff series against this Thunder defense, it really got exposed. They just didn't. They did not have the ball handling capacity without Ja Morant to handle that defense.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably likely to change, with the offseason changes and the way that they're going to have to maneuver here. I think that next season you're more likely to see a true point guard in that spot. In one of those spots, I should say. But yeah, it's been a rough series. It's been rough from the get-go. You and I both were in Oklahoma City. The first loss, the game one loss, almost feels like it's not even worth talking about. The second loss was, right on par with what happened throughout the regular season between these two teams. But I think my overall takeaway, and coming out of game three is this is going to be a series, and I wrote it like that's hard that features a lot of hard lessons for the Grizzlies, and it's probably going to show just how far they are from the top of the Western Conference. But I don't view it as entirely useless. Like I still view it as somewhat valuable to get a look at this. That's a lot different now that Ja's hurt, in my opinion, because that's like the last thing that you wanted in this situation was the injury risk to the player that elevates your ceiling. And like, what are you going to get out of a game against OKC if Ja doesn't play on Saturday? Not much, I don't think. So it feels like everything that could go wrong in the series has gone wrong. Do you sort of view it that way?
Well, not. I mean, not entirely. I feel like I feel like I've come to a little bit different place than most people watching this, and that, this is partly more about OKC than about Memphis. I actually, I'm a little lower on Oklahoma City now than I was coming into the series because I think the Grizzlies sort of shown. I know they've lost. They're down 0-3 and they've lost. They've gotten blown out in multiple halves, not just in game one. They sort of they've sort of shown that if you can keep from turning the ball over a lot, that if the Thunder can't create a lot of turnovers, like their half court offense has not been that good against the Grizzlies defense. It's not very good for the most part. I I kind of I'm not sure that Oklahoma City is as separate from everyone else as I thought, and to the point that I'm not going to be surprised if they really struggle in the second round with the Clippers, because I think the Clippers have two veteran ball handlers in Kawhi Leonard and James Harden who can handle the physicality and keep from coughing the ball up with them. And if you can limit your turnovers, I think you can play with OKC. And the Grizzlies can't do that without Morant. And once they figured it out, they lost Morant. And so I don't know. I think there are obviously lots of issues with the Grizzlies. I don't know that those issues have been fully exposed in this series. I think maybe they were already exposed, frankly. And so, we'll get into that with the offseason stuff. But I don't know. I don't see that. I just don't see this series as a sudden revelation of stuff for the Grizzlies. I feel like it's underscored some stuff maybe we already knew.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Underscored more than revelation, but we knew that they were far from being one of the best teams in the Western Conference. They haven't beaten a playoff team in the West since January, right? Like we knew that. Um, but I do think that there was like we can get into some people in particular here, some players in particular. I do think that there was going to be value in seeing how the three stars could compete in a playoff series, even if what is around them has been diminished to the point where it was highly unlikely the Grizzlies were going to be competitive in the series. And Jaren had a pretty miserable start in game one with 4 points and three rebounds. And he bounced back in that second game, particularly in the second half of that game, where he looked a lot more aggressive. And then in game three, it was a little bit of a continuation of what he did in game two. Um, how has Jaren's, and there's a lot of things surrounding him here to talk about. You wrote about it with his offseason contract stuff, all of that. But how would you just gauge the way that Jaren has played in this series relative to his potential?
I Game one was, maybe his worst playoff game, sort of statistically it was, but of course that was like the worst of everything for all the Grizzlies. I feel like I feel decent about Jaren and how he's played in games two and three generally. I think he should have gotten up more shots in game three. He only took two 3-pointers. It was 1 or 2. I, I think they should have gotten more attempts out of him and more stuff out of him. But I think, this is a guy we talked about had more single digit games, as many single digit games as 20 plus games in his playoff career up until the last two games. And he's been over that 20 mark each of the last two games. He has shown he can get shots against a variety of guys. I think one of the things that happened in this series was there was some adjustment, counter adjustment. I think the Grizzlies adjusted the kind of touches he was getting in game two effectively. And I think one of the things that Mark Dagnall figured out was that Jaren can get different kinds of shots and get different kind of defenders, but some are better than others. And counterintuitively, I think Dagnall figured out that it's more successful to guard Jaren with Alex Caruso and Jalen Williams than it is of Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren, because of the way the Grizzlies are going to try to use Jaren in those matchups. And I think Dagnall deliberately put the smaller guys on Jaren to try to force Jaren into the post instead of these face-ups. And I think that was good coaching from him. I feel pretty good about Jaren coming out of this as a guy who can be an option in the heat of playoff basketball against really good defense. But it's clear he's a second option in that situation. And when you lose Morant, it's harder for him. He's not the guy who's going to necessarily take over. It's harder for a big man to do that if you're not like Giannis or Jokic or whatever. And so to me, it was more the guard play stuff that got exposed than Jaren. And I think to me, the series has been a little bit more of a commentary on Bane, honestly, than it's been on Jaren.
Yeah, 100% I agree with everything you said. And we're gonna have a lot to talk about this summer, and so we should honestly save the contract stuff for later on down the line when that becomes actual time for that. Um, but to your point on the way that the Thunder have defended him, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because when you watch Jaren as a player, he's not the most smooth guy in anything that he does. It's all a little bit unorthodox, right?
Right.
Every drive to the basket, like I think even the timing on some of his shots throws off defenders, and maybe that's easier to adjust to over the course of a 7 game series. But like, it's not. It doesn't look like when he drives to the basket, it certainly doesn't look like when Ja drives to the basket, or even when a player closer to his size like Kawhi Leonard tries to drive to the basket, or Kevin Durant. Um, it's it's almost as if like it's barely staying on the rails, so or on the tracks every time he drives the ball. It's like almost a turnover, but then it's a bucket. And when you think about the way that the Thunder have been able to guard him with Caruso, like that's just a guy that's going to affect your dribble more so than affect your shot. And it's the dribble that's the hard part for
Right.
Jaren to get to, not the shot.
Well,
So,
I think the mismatch quality with Jaren is like you can drive on bigs, you can post little. That's sort of the basic thing of it. But I think Jaren is better driving than posting skill wise. I think the post stuff is easier to double and triple team. It taxes him more as a passer. And it's a little bit of a like, you're sort of suckering him into doing that because, yeah, it's a little guy, but it's Alex Caruso and it's Jalen Williams, right? These guys are great post defenders for their size. And so it sort of invites you into a situation where Jaren's not as good. I think he's better facing up than in the post. And that's why I turn to the 3-point shooting in that game. That's sort of the third leg of the stool with the kind of touches and shots Jaren gets. Is I think it's harder to post, even though they're little, because they're good defenders and the doubles are easier to come. But you can shoot over the top, and that's why I wish he would have gotten a little bit more catch and shoot 3-point stuff in that game if they have the smaller guys on him.
I don't know. What did you make of the reaction to the way that he played in game one? And how like there's a lot of criticism about like his rebounding, for example.
I mean, there always has been, yeah.
And there always
but
has
when
been.
you say how did I react to the reaction, I don't. That depends on what the reaction is. Like, I just don't know.
Well,
Like,
I mean,
can we get can someone like type up a report after every game and say this is what the reaction has been to Jaren? Because I don't. Otherwise,
well, I mean
how
the
am I supposed to
reaction
know what the
from
reaction
Jaren.
is?
I should have
Oh,
said, I
from
mean,
Jaren.
from Jaren, who seemed to be like in a rough mental state. Like it was almost like he needed the reminder, hey, like you have to be aggressive in these games. It's not, and it almost felt like embarrassment a little bit. And then we got the response in games 2 and games 3.
Yeah, I think the game one was a lot on Jaren and partly on the team in terms of the kind of touches he was getting. I think it seems like they put an emphasis going into game two on getting him going more and getting him better touches. And you saw him get a lot more stuff on the perimeter where he could sort of work off the dribble. I think that has been the growth of his game last year and early this year is him as a guy who can really face up and use his length and touch to get into the lane and make shots. And I think the offense shifted down the stretch, and even more so after the coaching change, away from that. And I think it's really important that going into next season for them to not have Jaren get lost as like this, secondary option, when you're orienting your team around, a Ja Morant, Zach Edey pick and roll or whatever. I think Jaren as a primary scoring threat has to be key to how you manage your team. And I think Jaren, he's not had great games in 2 and 3, but given the quality of the defense he's faced and given the other lack of options on the floor for the Grizzlies, like I generally feel pretty good about him, in games 2 and 3. Like I mean, he has been above his playoff average these last 2 games against a super elite defense. I'll put it that way.
Let's get into Desmond Bane, but first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
It's been a rough series for Desmond Bane.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a tough matchup for him given again, just to talk about strengths and weaknesses of his game, I think the ball handling aspect is certainly one of the weaknesses. And that is something that the Thunder have really been able to expose with some of these defenders that they're able to use on him and just how disruptive they are. But he's not the only one that's been bothered by it. Everyone's been bothered by that. But for a player that is going to have the ball in his hands as much as he does, that part of it has been disappointing. Just your thoughts on his play.
I mean, this is something I should probably dig into a little bit more. A lot of this Grizzly season, we've been talking about like what works against good teams and what works against bad teams. A lot of the story of the season has been like stuff, a lot of what they do works against the bad teams and doesn't work against the good teams. And I wonder if Desmond Bane as a higher usage playmaker creator is one of those things. I have to go back and like go through his game logs and really take a closer look at that. But I feel like, the Desmond Bane, like high assist games, the downhill Des, the working off the dribble, all of that maybe works a little bit better against lesser teams, especially lesser defenses. And I think one of the things I sort of get out of this is that he's just overtaxed in this regard. And he's a really terrific shooter. And I think we've lost some of that early career, like off ball, classic scoring guard, off ball, catch and shoot, attack and close out, that kind of stuff, where you're playing off ball as a scoring threat and the primary action is somewhere else. And maybe that is really the highest and best use of him and not someone they're relying on to create a lot of offense. So, Ja Morant missed a lot of games. It's been part of that. And then you have it last night where Ja Morant's missing the second half. And like, that's sort of where you have to go. And, maybe whether that's the growth of Scottie Pippen, it's more of a playmaker, or that's, some other players who can handle and create. I mean, because you're going to assume, like, if you're bringing all these guys back, like Morant's not playing, 82 games. Like, he's going to miss games next year too. And so you have to have a way to like not have to rely on Desmond Bane to be sort of a de facto point guard, because I just don't think that works against good defenses.
Yeah, I think that there are elements to Desmond Bain that are critical in a series like this. One is his leadership.
Yeah,
Honestly, he's
yeah,
like the guy to issue the reminder in a calm and very thoughtful way. Uh, that things can turn around, that things can get better. Like I think he has a lot to offer when it comes to that sort of thing. But this series in particular has put him in a very difficult position because again, like the strength of the Thunder works against in his weakness.
right.
And he's being asked to do more than maybe he should, as you pointed out. So, I don't, if we're gonna have the conversation of like, can Jaren perform in playoff games? Like, I don't have the same. I guess I'm searching for the word here. Like I don't question it quite as much. Like I still think that scoring big scoring games in the playoffs are there for Desmond Bain. I think that this is a little bit more matchup oriented,
Yeah,
but it certainly has not been a good series for him. And I just find it interesting. Like the same panic level is not there for Desmond Bain, although he struggled in two of these games. That was there for Jaren after game one, if that makes sense.
yeah. I just think that they need to find a way to reemphasize his shooting and de-emphasize his ball handling. When to me, that's just my main takeaway.
Um, do you what do you think is going to be the lasting impression from this series when we talk about this like 2 years from now with the Grizzlies back in the playoffs or whatever, and we go back and talk about it? Are we going to talk about what a juggernaut the Thunder were, or are we going to talk about the way that it all came apart for this team?
I think the second, A, because we're focused on the Grizzlies, but I also think let's assume Ja does not play game four, which seems that's my assumption at this point. As we record, we have no info on that, but that is certainly my assumption. If that's the case, this will be the third straight playoff series in which he has missed a game with an injury he has gotten in the series. This is in the context of a season in which he had, I lost count, it was like 11 or 12 separate absences for mostly injury related stuff. There was one or two. There was one that was illness. So maybe they weren't all injury related, but they were mostly injury related. And the sense that you're all just always waiting for something to happen with Ja health related that's going to take him out of a game or take him out of games is just a constant now. And I think it's just going to be a thing. And it may be that it may be that the pluses are enough that you stick with that. It may be that the alternatives are bad enough that like it just is what it is, and you have to deal with it, and like teams have to deal with problems, and Ja Morant availability and worry about that may just be a problem you have to deal with. But I think that's a thing that really is sort of like the problem of the season and the problem of the last few seasons was embodied in this series. And then the losing Wells and Clark late in the season, and the having that also be something that you just feel like you're always playing short. Now I think
Yeah.
we all know that playing short against even at full strength, you're probably losing this series to the Thunder anyway. But that sense of like of the sense of fragility with your roster is just a thing that's been a constant for the Grizzlies for multiple seasons now.
Yeah, no, 100%. Um, I believe it was you that asked earlier this season what gives you the confidence that Morant can
Yeah,
play in full
to
playoff
Jenkins.
series to Jenkins, given the fact that he hasn't played in five straight games all season.
Yeah, and here we are, and
And
it's not
that,
going to happen.
right. No, that was a good question at the time, remains a good question now. And the answer perhaps should have been there isn't. Like
Yeah,
we
but
haven't seen it. There
he
isn't
can't say
anything to
that.
give me confidence.
I mean, it was a good
Right.
question, but it was not a good question that was going to get a good answer. I
Right.
mean, it just is what it is, right? Jenkins couldn't say, well, you can't have confidence in that. I mean, you can't say that it's the case, right? Even if that's the truth.
Yeah. No, but it was an important point to be raised, and to me, that's like if you're ever gonna wonder why the ceiling of the Grizzlies is going to be limited, like it starts there. It's interesting because we talk about all these different players, and I think that each play a role in in making the team better. But just take Ja and Jaren, for example. Um, like Jaren is a player that to me very clearly elevates the floor of this team
Yep.
because he is so productive and dependable in the regular season. He played all those games. Like he was extremely helpful when Ja wasn't playing this season and is probably the reason that the Grizzlies are in the playoffs altogether. And Ja is the reason why the Grizzlies have a higher ceiling. Um, he elevates that for Memphis. He makes it possible to dream about going to the Western Conference Finals, to the NBA Finals one day, because he's the guy that can take over a game and go win a big time game for you. Like he was taking over that Golden State game before he turned the ankle, right? He was
Right.
taking over that OKC game 3 before he fell out of the sky. Like they're two very different players. They're both very important to the team, but it's interesting what role they play in terms of star power for the Grizzlies seems very different at this point in their career. Like Jaren feels way more steady than Ja, but the peaks of Ja feel way higher than Jaren. To me, that dynamic is very interesting.
Yeah, but it makes both sort of important. Like, I mean, in the absence of like better alternatives, which may not be there, like, that puts you in the limitations of the different limitations of those players may create limitations for your team, but you can turn the coin around and like the different strengths of those players in terms of floor and ceiling also like gives you things that lots of other teams in the league don't have, right? And so I'm still at a place where even with the limitations, having the strengths of those players together when they're 25 years old, there are teams in better places structurally, but there are teams in a lot worse places structurally than having those two guys.
Anything else that we're missing here on this series?
Um,
Thoughts on Isolo? I mean, this was going to be a test run for him too to see how this was going to go.
it
How do
was
you think
brought to my,
he's done?
you know, it was right to me. The end of that game was so deflating that by the end, I just wasn't locked into the X's and O's, even though they had a chance at the end. But it was brought to my attention today, this morning. I was talking to somebody that the shot they had to tie, which ended up being a Conchar open in the corner that he missed. That Scottie Pippen was not in the game for that possession. Did you note that at the time? The play at the very end, near the end, where it ended up being a Conchar corner three to tie, a wide open corner three that he missed. Remember that play?
Yes.
Kennard drives. Kennard misses the layup, but gets the ball back. It kicks it to Conchar in the corner. Conchar is the open three that would have tied. He missed the shot. It's brought to my attention this morning that Scottie Pippen, who had not fouled out, was not in the game for that possession. He had taken Pippen out and put Conchar in.
Did Scotty have 5 fouls?
I think he did, but like there's like a minute left in the game,
I know.
and it's an offensive possession. So I'm that like was he not in the game because of the 5 fouls?
That's
People,
what I would assume. I'm not trying to make up an excuse for Tomas, but
right?
like that's what I would assume is that maybe the play wasn't even to get a three. Maybe it was to try to get a quick two, and they were going to foul, and they didn't want Scotty to foul out of the game. They even like when they knew they were going to have it do a take foul when Morant was going to come out of the game after the free throws. Like
They put Vince
they
in,
put
yeah.
Vince in to take the foul. Like they didn't want Scott. They clearly were doing everything they could to make sure Scotty was there at the end. But
So that's the kind of thing you can like. Okay, so what is the strategy and who you had on the floor and who you didn't? Pippen's a guy who had made 6 threes in that game, and now he's out on the floor when you need a three. Maybe if he's in that position and I think Contra threw the inbounds. Maybe Pippen's a guy who gets that shot in the corner. I think when you drill down, you can get into like game time decision coaching questions with Isolo. He's also
mhm.
someone who like doesn't really have his staff. Like they fired 3 coaches, not one, a month ago.
Right.
And so the coaching infrastructure around him, not to denigrate any of the assistants who are there, but they're sort of on the fly, right? That's got to impact how you manage games when you're dealing with all that. I just think ultimately Isolo is going to be judged internally, not by the 48 minutes of basketball times 4 against the Thunder. They're going to judge him more by what they're seeing internally in terms of game planning, in terms of interaction with players, in terms of trying to run stuff. I do think in the macro sense, he's done really smart stuff. Like the thing I was talking about earlier in the pod about, the decision to really focus on, going quick to minimize turnovers, I think was right. I think some of the adjustments they made with Jaren were good. I think he's done a lot of good stuff. Like if you drill down into like, specific play call and, use of coaches challenges, which I think have been shaky since he's taken over and some of that stuff, I think it's probably been a mixed bag, but I it's still a thing where when it to me, there's like a tissue rejection issue. Like, do you feel a coach like has it? And I think he has it. Now, having it doesn't mean you're the right guy or the best guy. But I sort of, well, from what I've seen, I sort of believe in him as a viable head coach. Again, that's separate from whether he's the right head coach or not.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's an interesting dynamic, and I think that there's several elements in play here that I'll add a couple in addition to what you said. Um, I think that it was important to see the way that he was going to react to taking over the head coaching job.
Right,
And the sense that I've been able to get is that he's like really taken a hold of this thing to the point where it's impressed some of the players. Like I had a conversation with Zach Edey about it. Zach Edey seems really happy with the way that the end of the season has gone. He's a very important player to the team.
right.
Ja obviously is going to be more happy with an offense where the ball is in his hands. Um, there's a lot of I think there is some player happiness, for lack of a better word, satisfaction, I should say, player
Yeah,
satisfaction with the way that the end of the season has gone, and that is very notable. Now, the one that is key, I think, is Jaren,
right.
especially given that Jaren is coming up on what will be the last year of his contract next season if there is no extension. So, you know, I think it's important to have a coach that Jaren would really believe in and Jaren feels like he can play for. And I'm not saying that Jaren suggested anything otherwise, like with Asalo. Like we haven't, Jaren hasn't said anything bad about the guy. He's like, but it doesn't feel like his offense and what the changes that he's made have been have made Jaren a huge benefactor, which I think is notable. Although he's played better in these last two games. So
No, but
I think
I
those
know I agree with all that, but I do note the adjustment, particularly from game one to game two, to focus on Jaron. I think Isolo recognized between game one and game two that Jaron is more fruitful for him against this defense than some other things, and made the point to go to him more and to get him the ball in better spots. And for him to recognize that in the heat of the series, I think bodes well in terms of him recognizing that in a macro sense going into next season if he
right.
has the
That's what I'm
job.
saying. That's what I was saying. It may be different at large, right? Like,
Right.
just talking about his offense, like over the course of an 82 game season or whatever. It may
Because
have.
Isolo has been he said this multiple times. I think he's sensitive to the idea people have that he's a system coach and like he coached a certain way in Paris and that's what he's going to do. And
Mhm.
he's gone out of his way multiple times to say when people ask him about his coaching philosophy, his first thing he says is, "I'm a pragmatist. I want to do whatever I need to do with the talent I have to get the best net rating." Right? That's the way he says it. And so he sort of makes it clear that he wants to be pragmatic. And it may
Yep.
be that when he was playing for Paris, not a lot of Jaron Jackson Juniors,
No,
in Europe.
no.
Jaron Jackson Jr.,
They don't
Evan
have Jaron
Mobley.
Jacksons walking on the street unless it's
No,
fashion week over
there's not
there,
a lot
you
of.
know?
I mean, quick guards. I mean, they're not Ja Morant, but quick guards are more common. Big guys who can screen are common. The Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, Evan Mobley's, Chet Holmgren's, like 7 foot dudes who can do everything. They just don't have those guys over there, and so maybe he coaches a little bit different if he has one when he has one of those guys.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And yeah, that's right. That's what he says every time he gets asked. He's always talking about solutions, 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 solutions. He's the solution man. So I think I think it's notable the way that this series has gone because it would be a hell of a lot easier to hand the full-time head coaching gig over to a guy if it felt like you had some momentum. And
Oh, that's right.
instead, it feels like this thing is ending with a whimper. And the same goes for like I mean that's why Jaren's game two and game three performances are so notable because all indications are the Grizzlies are going to try to get some sort of extension done with the guy this summer,
Right.
and it would have been really painful to feel any feel like you have to try to do that and pay up big time for a player that you don't have faith can perform in the playoffs. And so it's a good
Right.
thing that he performed well in those next two games. It's hard. It's hard to say, yeah, well, we just watched the season fizzle out the way that it did, but we're going to hand you the head coaching job. I mean, optically, it's hard. Maybe it's not hard inside of the building to do
No,
that.
I think
Optically, it is harder.
I think that's exactly the right way to put it. I I don't know that this the outcomes of these games has that much sway on the Grizzlies' internal evaluation of Isolo, but it certainly may have an impact on how fans perceive it. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think he's done a very good job. I've liked a lot of the changes he's made late in the season. Um, and I think in the end, this is going to come down to how the players feel about him. And so far, like I said, Zach Edey seems to really like the changes he's made. Ja seems to really like some of the changes that he's made. Like I think that there are big positives there. So I mean, he doesn't have a job or anything. The Grizzlies haven't made any sort of announcement. I wouldn't even expect them to rush some sort of decision like that because they don't even necessarily have to.
Yeah, I don't
But
think we're going to get a coaching announcement at the final media session. Like, let's
no,
put it
I
that
don't
way,
think so
right?
either. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I don't think so either. But um, I think that the assumption that a lot of people have been operating under is like if he does a good job, he's just going to end up as the head coach. And I don't think that there's anything that's changed there, right?
Right.
Um, so we will see what happens in game four. Grizzlies will be back in action against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Could be the last game of the
It,
season for Memphis.
is there anything specific you want to see in Game 4 from the Grizzlies?
Honestly, Chris,
I ask because I have a couple. I have two things on my wish list.
I want to see him get out of the game healthy.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. That's a very good one. Yeah.
Um, we don't need anybody else set back in the offseason. I want to see him keep going to Jaren. I think one of the things that's been very notable about the series that we didn't touch on that we should have touched on earlier when we talked about Jaren is like, and it's something I asked him about last night. It's like his ability to handle these double and triple teams that will be thrown at him for the rest of his career, and at times he's really struggled with, is very notable. Like, and this is a very good practice run for him
Yep.
at having being the center of attention, having these doubles and triples thrown at you, and being able to make a read and pass out of it and make a positive play. That's going to be part of the game plan to stopping Jaren for the rest of his career. And it's also one of the areas where he's not the strongest right now, but it's also something that's very improvable, in my opinion. To make those passes, and he did it in game three, and he was really good in certain moments. I want more of that. That's probably what I would say, but I'm sure you have a more thoughtful answer than me here.
No, I mean that's one of my two, and that's just I just want, assuming John doesn't play, I just want extremely high Jaren Jackson Jr. usage in that game. Lots of touches, lots of shots. I want the ball in his hands as much as possible in that game. And then the other thing I want, predictably, but I'm telling you, just put Vince Williams Jr. in the rotation in this game. I
I knew it.
you brought him off the they brought him off the bench for like one play at the end of the second half, into the first half. He immediately got a block that turned into a three from Luke Kennard at the other end. He's reasonably healthy right now. You don't have other options. You need athleticism on the floor. And if you're really just playing for next season at this point, to the degree that you have time left to play, he's someone I think more so than Kennard or Conchar who's going to matter for the team next season, or at least could matter for the team next season. So, like, get a head start on that and just throw him out there and let him play.
The Grizzlies should have petitioned to get two-way players in the game. They should have had a halftime petition. They should have passed it around the seats of FedEx Forum to get two-way players eligible in the playoffs, and they could have had Yuki on the ball.
Right?
Yuki on the
Yeah.
ball would have been more secure. That third quarter run might not happen if Yuki's in the game. So, no, I'm half kidding, but the minute that Ja went down, that felt like it was it. So, point guard
Yep.
Jaren. Point guard Jaren next game. Let's get as many
Hey,
touches to the big fella as possible.
one way to get like a face-up touch is to just bring the ball up the floor yourself.
100%. There you go.
Yeah.
It does drive me kind of crazy. I still see a lot of, not to extend this too far, but I still see a lot of, Jaren, I'm begging you to catch the ball closer to the basket. And I'm kind of like, he's been better when he catches it further from the basket.
No, they have generated more points per touch from him facing up from 22 feet than from him in the post. And I know that's counterintuitive for people, but that's been the case.
Yeah. All right. Well, that will do it for us this week. We'll be back next week. We'll probably, let's just be honest here. We can be honest, right? I mean, we're going to be talking about the end of the season. It feels like we're headed that way. And so next week we will be back after the Grizzlies clean out their lockers, and we will be breaking down everything that happened this season, setting you up for the summer. We'll talk a little draft. We'll talk contracts. We'll talk futures of players, all of that. But until then, for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.